makes a monster, someone who has terrorized a community and evaded capture, suddenly decide to just give up? It's a question that completely flips the script on the typical true crime story. We're all used to the dramatic manhunts, the tense standoffs, and the brilliant detective work that finally corners the killer. But in some of the most brutal cases in history, the end didn't come with a bang. It came from a quiet phone call or a chillingly calm confession. Some of the most vicious murderers didn't meet their end because they were caught. Their reign of terror ended because they chose it to. Today, we're looking at the shocking stories of 4 serial killers who decided to turn themselves in, revealing every gruesome detail of their crimes and the twisted reasons for their surrender. These are the stories of the killers who gave up. In the early 1970s, a chilling fear hung over Santa Cruz, California. Young women, mostly college students trying to hitch a ride, were vanishing. The disappearances were regular enough to create an atmosphere of paranoia in a town meant to be a haven of counterculture freedom. The man behind it all was a walking contradiction, a giant standing 6'9" with a genius-level IQ, but he was also socially awkward and filled with a rage that had been boiling for years. His name was Edmund Kemper, but the world would come to know him as the co-ed killer. Between 1972 and 1973, Kemper played a deadly game. He drove around Santa Cruz, picking up hitchhikers. He later said he was always pushing his limits, that the urge was like an awful raging eating feeling inside. For some, the ride ended safely. For 6 of them, it was their last.
How would you select your victims?
I didn't select them. It was random. And it was also the development of the passion. If I was drove, they died. Like the last 2 victims. I was so pissed I'd have killed anybody that got in the car.
He'd take them to isolated areas, where the friendly giant would reveal the monster underneath. His methods were horrifyingly systematic. After the murders, he would take their bodies back to his apartment for the sole purpose of unspeakable acts, including necrophilia and dismemberment. These crimes were the climax of a lifetime of violent fantasies, most of them tangled up in the toxic relationship he had with his mother, Clarnell. Psychiatrists, and even Kemper himself, believed his victims were surrogates for the one person who was the true target of his rage. All through his killing spree, he was living with his mother, a woman he claimed constantly humiliated him. The tension in their home was a ticking time bomb, and in April 1973, it finally exploded. After a heated argument, Kemper waited for his mother to fall asleep, then bludgeoned her to death with a hammer and cut her throat. After desecrating her body in ways that showed the true depth of his hatred, he wasn't done. He invited her close friend, Sarah Hallett, over to the house and strangled her to death. With his mother dead, the driving force of his rage was gone. He later said the original purpose was gone. It wasn't serving any purpose. It was just a pure waste of time. He got in his car and just started driving east, eventually ending up in Pueblo, Colorado. For days, he listened to the radio, waiting for the news of what he'd done to break, but he heard nothing. The silence was unbearable. From a phone booth in Colorado on April 23, 1973, Edmund Kemper called the Santa Cruz police to confess. Incredibly, the officer on duty thought it was a prank and told him to call back later. But Kemper was persistent. He called again, this time asking for an officer he knew personally, and calmly laid it all out. He confessed to killing his mother and her friend, and then admitted he was the co-ed killer they'd been hunting. Police in Pueblo arrested him, and he was almost eager to talk. In lengthy videotaped confessions, he described his crimes with a chilling intelligence that stunned investigators. He provided the FBI with an unprecedented look into the mind of a serial killer. Found sane and guilty, Kemper asked for the death penalty. But since capital punishment was suspended in California, he got 8 life sentences instead. He wasn't caught by detectives. He was caught because, in his mind, the mission was over, and there was nothing left to do but turn himself in. The end for Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't a voluntary phone call. His story is different. His reign of terror ended on July 22, 1991, when a man named Tracy Edwards fled Dahmer's Milwaukee apartment with a handcuff dangling from his wrist, flagged down police, and led them back to a real-life house of horrors. But what followed was a surrender of a different kind, a complete verbal capitulation so detailed and grotesque it left seasoned detectives speechless. When police stepped into apartment 213, they found a scene of pure evil. There were Polaroids of dismembered victims, a human head in the refrigerator, more heads in the freezer, and a 57-gallon drum filled with acid and decomposing torsos. Skulls were in a closet, and other remains were scattered around. In total, they found the remains of 11 men. Faced with the undeniable evidence, Dahmer reportedly just said, "I can't believe I was so stupid. I never thought I'd get caught like this. I was always so careful." But once in custody, something shifted. He didn't deny anything. He didn't try to lie. Instead, sitting with Detective Patrick Kennedy, Dahmer started talking. And for the next several weeks, sometimes for 16 hours a day, he calmly confessed to the murders of 17 young men and boys, stretching from 1978 to 1991. This wasn't just an admission of guilt. It was a guided tour through one of history's most depraved minds. Lust played a big part of it. Control and lust, he told them. He admitted the killing itself wasn't the goal. The killing was just a means to an end. That was the least satisfactory part. I didn't enjoy doing that. What he really wanted, he explained, was complete control over his victims to keep them with him forever. This led him to necrophilia and cannibalism. He admitted to eating the muscles of some victims and explained he kept their skeletons because it was my way of remembering their appearance, their physical beauty. I also wanted to keep. If I couldn't keep them there with me whole, I at least could keep their skeletons. Perhaps most disturbing was his attempt to create living zombies by drilling into his victims' skulls and pouring in acid or boiling water, hoping to render them completely submissive. It never worked. Detectives were stunned by his calm, lucid demeanor. He spoke of these horrors with almost no emotion, like a scientist discussing a failed experiment. Detective Kennedy later admitted he was almost grateful for Dahmer's candor, as the details were vital to identifying the many victims. While he was caught and not self-surrendered, Dahmer's shocking and total confession was a voluntary act. He gave up every one of his secrets, revealing a truth so horrifying the world could barely comprehend it. Sometimes the surrender is so direct it's hard to believe. In November 1998, a long-haul truck driver named Wayne Adam Ford walked into the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department with his brother. He approached the front desk, pulled a plastic bag out of his coat pocket, and placed it on the counter. Inside was a woman's severed breast. He then confessed to the murders of 4 women. Ford, a former Marine, had been killing women he picked up on the road since 1997. His confession was prompted by his brother, who, after a long, emotional conversation, convinced the deeply troubled Ford to turn himself in. Racked with guilt and haunted by what he'd done, Ford finally agreed. He told investigators he was afraid his rage was escalating and that he didn't want to kill anyone else. The breast he brought with him belonged to a woman whose remains had been found scattered, but she hadn't yet been identified. Ford's confession provided the key. He cooperated fully, detailing the murders of 4 women he had sexually assaulted, killed, and, in 3 cases, dismembered. He was eventually found guilty and sentenced to death. His case remains one of the most chillingly literal examples of a killer turning himself in, carrying the proof of his monstrosity with him. And then there's Henry Lee Lucas, whose story twists the whole idea of a confession into something else entirely. It's less about a single act of surrender and more about a flood of admissions that swamped law enforcement agencies across the country. Lucas wasn't just a serial killer, he was a serial confessor. It started in 1983. Lucas, a one-eyed drifter, was arrested in Texas for having a firearm. While in jail, he confessed to 2 recent murders. This wasn't shocking, as he'd already served time for killing his own mother in 1960. But then, at his arraignment, he casually asked the judge, What are we gonna do about these other 100 women I killed? That question opened the floodgates. The number of his claimed victims skyrocketed from 100 to 600, and sometimes he and his partner, Otis Toole, claimed a mind-boggling 3,000 killings. For cops with cold cases, Lucas felt like a miracle. A Lucas task force was set up, and detectives flew in from all over to get a confession out of him. Lucas was treated like a star, given steak dinners, milkshakes, and cigarettes in exchange for his stories. Investigators would often show him case files, basically feeding him the details he'd then spit back out as a confession. Based on his word alone, police cleared nearly 200 cold cases. For a while, Henry Lee Lucas was considered the most prolific serial killer in history. But it was all a house of cards. Journalists started digging and found huge holes in his stories. They proved he couldn't have possibly committed all the murders he claimed. He would have needed to be in different states at the same time. The confession killer was, for the most part, a serial liar. So why do it? He craved the attention. He was no longer a forgotten drifter. He was a criminal mastermind. By confessing, he gained power over the system that locked him up. In the end, Lucas was only conclusively linked to 3 murders, though he's a suspect in a few others. He later recanted almost all his confessions, claiming it was all a hoax. His legacy isn't just that of a murderer, but of a master manipulator whose lies created chaos in the pursuit of justice. The stories of Edmund Kemper, Jeffrey Dahmer, Wayne Adam Ford, and Henry Lee Lucas are a rare but fascinating look into the criminal mind. They are killers who, for their own reasons, chose to step out of the shadows. Kemper felt his life's dark mission was over after he murdered his mother. Dahmer, though captured, surrendered his secrets in a flood of horrifying detail. Ford, burdened by guilt, walked into a police station with proof of his crimes in his pocket. And Lucas built an empire of lies, confessing to hundreds of murders for fame and an easier life in jail. Their confessions, whether true, exaggerated, or completely false, gave us an unsettling look at what drove them. And these cases force us to ask a difficult question. What's more terrifying, the monster hiding in the darkness, or the one who willingly steps into the light to tell you exactly what he's done? Let us know what you think in the comments below.